Well, we heard Bob Carr there for one, very suspicious about the security concerns, national security concerns that have seen two Chinese bidders blocked from buying Ausgrid, the New South Wales electricity distributor. His big point here is that the other electricity distributor New South Wales has already sold, Transgrid, was last year. There were 4 bidders for it last year. One of them was State Grid, China's State Grid, one of the companies that today has been blocked from buying Ausgrid. Last year, China's State Grid was given the all-clear to go ahead and buy Transgrid in New South Wales. In the end, it went to another bidder, a Canadian bidder. But his point here, if it was okay for them to buy the other distributor last year, why has it been blocked now, post-election in Australia? He suspects, in his words, the witch's brew of xenophobia unleashed by the federal election result, particularly in the Senate. Well, that's not how the government sees it. It denies domestic politics played any role in this decision from the Treasurer. Josh Frydenberg is the Minister for Energy and the Environment. I spoke to him a little earlier. Josh Frydenberg, thank you for joining us. The Treasurer today announced that both bidders, the State Grid Corporation and the privately owned Hong Kong Chung Kong Infrastructure Group, won't be allowed to buy or long-term lease Ausgrid. Is that the right decision, do you believe?
Well, it's clearly the right decision because the FIRB process is a very rigorous process, and as the Treasurer has said, this is a preliminary decision based on national security grounds. As Treasurer, every FIRB decision for him is a difficult one. It's done on a case-by-case basis, but clearly the proper analysis was done here and the proper decision taken.
Are you made aware of what those national security grounds are?
Well, I'm not a member of the National Security Committee, but the relevant people have been consulted and informed about the implications of this decision and also the reasons for it.
But do you think we deserve a bit more of an explanation? Because a lot of people will be saying, well, hang on, these two companies already own extensive gas and power networks in New South Wales, in Victoria. They own pipelines in Queensland and South Australia. Why is this one different?
Well, as you know, in the energy space, it's divided into the generators of that energy, it's divided then into the transmitters of that energy, the distributors of that energy, and then the retail assets. And we have foreign-owned companies in all elements of that chain,
including
in the
these
energy
two
sector,
companies.
Including those two companies. But when it comes to making decisions before FIRB, it's done on a case-by-case basis, and of course the right decision was taken here.
But all these other ones have been allowed, including them to buy City Power and Powercore in Victoria, the South Australian Power Network, as I say. Now we have a different political climate, though, with the Senate, with Pauline Hanson, Nick Xenophon, all very opposed to this Ausgrid sale. Can you sit here and say it had nothing to do with politics?
This is not a political decision. This is a decision based on national security, and for those reasons, more details can't be provided.
Do you think we need clearer rules then around, particularly a state-owned enterprise, and whether they are allowed to bid for critical infrastructure like something in the energy market?
Well, if you look at the FIRB process, we have strengthened it, both in terms of the people that were brought onto it, and the Treasurer referred to David Irvine, the former head of ASIO, ACES, and an ambassador to China, who's come on to FIRB last year, as well as other members. We've also lowered the threshold for approvals to be given in certain sensitive areas like agriculture, and in critical infrastructure areas like telecommunications, like transport infrastructure, like energy infrastructure. We will closely look at these assets, but it's done on a case-by-case basis.
So you can't have a more definitive rule that says if you're a state-owned enterprise, you can't buy an electricity distributor.
Well, we say it's not that you can't buy, it's saying if you're a state-owned enterprise, then you will be subject to the FIRB approval process, and different sectors, different assets will raise different questions, and that is where the FIRB process kicks in.
Yeah, but it still means the Chinese bidders in this case have to go through all these hoops, all this process. They end up, humiliated at the end of it. Maybe that's too strong a word, but they'll feel...
I think that's too strong.
Well, they'll feel offended by this. I mean, we'll see what sort of reaction we get. But, wouldn't it be cleaner to say at the very outset, you can't bid for this? It's too sensitive.
But as you pointed out, you do have foreign-owned businesses in different aspects of the energy space, in other critical infrastructure areas. And of course, this is a specific decision based on the circumstances of this case. And as a government, our first obligation is to the Australian people and to make the best judgments based on the best available evidence to us, and to take into account national security implications, and that's what the Treasurer has done here.
We're all left a bit in the dark as to why this one is different to all those other assets.
Well, in a case like this, you just have to rely on the FIRB process.
We have to trust you.
And you have to rely on the best possible people making the best possible judgments based on the best possible advice.
Let's turn to the meeting you've called next week of your state and territory counterparts, energy ministers. It's a timely meeting that you've called, given what we've seen in Tasmania and specifically in South Australia with wild fluctuations in the energy prices there. What do you want to achieve with this meeting next week?
Well, as you say, it's a COAG Energy Council meeting made up of state and territory energy ministers, and it's chaired by me as the Commonwealth Energy Minister. We are driving changes across the energy market, particularly as we transition to a lower emissions future. And our goal is reliable and affordable energy supply. And South Australia was a wake-up call, David. What happened there?
What do you think happened there? What would you put it down to? Because it went from something like, what, $500 a megawatt hour
to 14,000.
14,000
in the one day. And that is a remarkable fluctuation in the spot price. By the way, it has happened before, even more numerous times back in 2008. But there were a complex range of factors. Primarily, there was an upgrade to the interconnector, which supplies electricity from Victoria into South Australia. And so that was being upgraded at that time. There was a cold snap, both in Victoria and South Australia, which led to higher demand. There was a spike in gas prices, which helped set electricity prices, and also the greater reliance in South Australia on wind and solar as intermittent sources of supply had an impact, because when the wind doesn't blow or the sun doesn't shine, the energy is not created.
Well,
so that's what played there.
Gas in particular, though, that spike in gas prices, and it's kind of been a growing trend, hasn't it, since the international market has opened up for gas supplies. That's driven the gas prices from something like $3 or $4 a gigajoule to as much as $20. That's hurting not just households, it's hurting a lot of industries as well.
Well, the prices are in Australia around $6 to $8 a gigajoule. You did get a spike at that particular time. Firstly, we've benefited greatly from the greater exploration and development in Australia of gas. We've seen some $200 billion worth of investment in the last decade in the LNG projects alone. That's created tens of thousands of jobs and will create billions of dollars of export income for our country, and company tax revenue and income tax as well. So that's a very significant change. And we have plenty of gas. We just need to explore and develop it a bit more. So one of the real focuses for us at this COAG Energy Council is, how do we get our gas markets to be more effective? How do we get more liquidity in there? How do we get more transparency in pricing, particularly in the use of pipelines?
On that, what do you want to see in terms of transparency that you don't already see?
So, for example, when a pipeline operator enters into a contract with a gas company to transmit that gas, 99% of the contracts remain secret. So you don't actually know what the pricing arrangement is in that bilateral contract.
The company that's built the pipeline, you don't know what they're getting.
They know what they're getting, but we don't.
But
and other companies don't. So if you could
want to find out what that is.
We want contracts to be more transparent, because then you'll get greater competition in the marketplace, and you won't be able to play off one buyer against another, as is currently the case.
Is that happening right now?
Well, certainly right now the situation is not ideal, and the ACCC, David, have recommended we change that. And there is common agreement among the states for changes there. But we also want more liquidity in the markets. We want more traded capacity in gas. In the United States, they have a Henry Hub type situation there, where more gas is traded. Ours is more long-term contracts, more bilateral contracts.
What about, and I know you've ruled this out before, but gas reservation? As you point out, we now produce a huge amount of gas, but a lot of it is going to other markets, Asia, India, and so on. And that's great for export dollars and all of that. Should we, and a lot of people say we should mandate to keep a certain amount of it for use here domestically in Australia?
Well, you won't often hear me agree with Labor ministers past and present, but here I agree with Martin Ferguson and Gary Gray, two energy ministers from the Labor Party. They both were very strongly against a domestic gas reservation policy. In fact, Martin Ferguson called it an investment killer. And the ACCC also strongly recommended against. And the reason why is because if you reserve gas to be sold just domestically and not on the international market, you'll be denying companies the best possible price. Well, and that will be a disincentive, it's been shown, for development and exploration.
I get that for the gas producers. They want the market to be as big.
But they want the incentive to develop it.
The price to be as high, absolutely. But what about manufacturers in Australia? I mean, companies like Dow Chemicals, who rely on cheap gas in Australia. There was a Deloitte report that predicted high gas prices could result in up to 15,000 manufacturing jobs going. It's manufacturers that hurt because of the gas price.
Well, I would flip that and say, I want to create more, 15,000 more manufacturing jobs by getting the gas prices lower through the reforms that we'll be considering at COAG.
You could get them a hell of a lot lower by mandating a certain amount of gas be kept.
Actually wrong, David. What you will do then is you will shut the gate on getting more investment in exploration, and over time you'll have less gas to be provided here in Australia, and what happens then in that case is prices will be higher.
What about states, Victoria, your home state, that still have a moratorium on gas exploration?
Yeah. Well, I've called for them to lift that, as well as in New South Wales.
You'll do that next week as well?
Well, I continue to do that, and the ACCC again has given us a roadmap for going forward. They've talked about a case-by-case basis for gas development as opposed to blanket moratoria, because we have in a situation today that 98.8% of the unconventional gas used on the eastern seaboard of Australia comes from one state, namely Queensland. And you've got these abundance of reserves in Queensland and in Victoria and New South Wales. Now, of course, you've got to consider first and foremost the interests of the local communities, the interests of the farmers.
That's where the National Party won't be terribly happy with
and Matt Canavan, my colleague, has now responsibility for gas under the ground.
Yeah, so do you see eye to eye with him on that?
Yeah, he and I are working very closely together in this area.
But Matt Canavan is pro coal seam gas.
Well, what we want here, David, is more gas development in Australia. That's what we're being told. And unfortunately, the Commonwealth doesn't have sovereign jurisdiction in these areas. These are state issues, but we can apply a bit of pressure.
Now, you mentioned renewables in the context of what happened in South Australia. It's not that reliable, steady supply, we know. Where does battery storage come in your thinking here, either large scale or at the small household scale, to get over that problem of not being there when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine?
Well, battery storage is absolutely the swing factor in the ability to get more renewables into the grid to become a baseload form of power. Because if you look at solar PV on people's homes, Australia has the greatest take-up per capita anywhere in the world. 15% of Australian households have solar PV on their roofs. But if you had the battery storage, then it would become a cheaper and a better product overall. Likewise, for companies, if they want reliable energy through the night, for example, or when the wind doesn't blow, they want grid size battery storage. Now, there's great changes taking place in this area, and the CSIRO tell me that the cost of batteries will come down about 60% over the next 10 years. They're increasing their capacity quite significantly. They're not there yet.
This is going to be a game changer.
I think this will be a game changer, but it's going to take time. I mean, the point about renewables is that they are more costly than coal, or they're more costly than gas. There's no secrets about that. But the costs are coming down. For example, with wind, it's come down about 50% over the last 7 years. Solar PV's come down about 80%. And if you can get battery storage into the mix, I think that will be important. People at home need to understand there is a transition. Over the last 5 years, 8 out of the 12 most emission-intensive power stations in Australia have closed. Now, all of those were coal. Really, it's very interesting. And coal went from being 77% of the overall electricity mix in Australia in 2004 to around 60% today.
It's only going to keep falling.
It will, but it's still very important. Let's not, walk away from the importance of coal. It's a critical part of our energy mix, but there is a transition taking place. And in recent years, all grid-connected energy generation in Australia has been of the renewables type.
What about some in the renewable industry say they need more certainty to make these big investments into battery storage and big wind and solar plants? The safeguards mechanism your government's put in place, does that need to be strengthened?
Well, we say the safeguards mechanism has got generous baselines as it is. That is staying.
Is it a price on carbon?
It's not a price on carbon at all, because what a price on carbon...
To explain to people, it's a penalty for the big emitters.
Well, it's not. We haven't budgeted any revenue,
no,
so you need to
have to pay it.
But that's
they have to pay
see, a carbon tax or price on carbon is all designed to collect revenue.
Okay, you might not have,
and we're not doing that.
Book, but okay, it may not be in your book, but they've got to pay a price, right?
Well, they're generous baselines, and so the companies are working effectively to do that, and that's only, as you know, to apply to the biggest emitters.
But okay. Technically, though, it is a price on the carbon they emit over a certain level.
It's not. I wouldn't call it a price on carbon, David.
A payment on the carbon they emit.
It's a safeguards mechanism.
Why are they reluctant to call it what it is? They pay money if they go over a certain line.
And we haven't budgeted any revenue, so I don't think you're seeing that.
But they're not paying you in chocolates and flowers. They're paying money, right, when they go over a certain line.
You put your finger on what is a really big difference between us and the Labor Party. Because right now we have a suite of policies to meet our 2030 targets, at 26 to 28%. We've got our emissions reduction fund, which is a market-based mechanism. We're going out into the market looking for the lowest cost abatement. And at $12.10 a tonne of emission abatement, it is, a fraction of what the carbon tax costs.
Some people say this is where you and Labor will eventually come together.
I can't see the kumbaya just yet.
Okay.
Labor has a renewable energy target of 50% by 2030. Ours, as you know, is legislated 23.5%. Our target that we took to Paris was 26 to 28% by 2030, a reduction on our 2005 targets. Labor has a 45% emission reduction target. Now, they haven't told us, we haven't seen any modelling, how they're going to get there, but we do know it will lead to higher electricity prices and more instability to the grid. So we've got a costed, funded, comprehensive suite of policies that are working. Labor are up in fairyland.
Josh Frydenberg, good to talk to you. Thanks for joining us.
Nice to be with you.